Unshaven and uncensored except for his balls. It's obviously Jesus. Greetings everybody, I'm obviously Jesus and welcome to the first Patreon video of the month of November 2017. I actually just finished recording this fucking video only to find out that basically none of it got recorded because my camera was a fucking piece of shit and shut off, so I'm very aggravated and I'm just going to breeze right through it. But today's prompt comes from Mellow Deep Throat, who asked me to talk about computer science and programming and my relationship to that. And we're going to use that prompt to tie into my feelings about education at large. I am extremely aggravated right now. I almost to the point where I don't want to make this video, but we'll just go through and try to breeze through it as fast as possible. So for those of you who don't remember, I used to make I think I made like a 6-part series on the old Obviously Jesus channel called Java with Jesus. And what I did in that video was I basically recounted what I had learned in university when I went to university for what they called IT, but what most universities would call computer science. I learned to program in Java and in a few other languages. I learned HTML and some JavaScript as well. It was not basically the most comprehensive course, but I learned it well enough and I was able to understand it well enough that I felt comfortable sort of regurgitating and teaching what I had learned in university to people on the internet, because it was really a passion project for me, because I did feel at one point very passionate about the idea and the concept of computer science. I've always been interested in computers from the earliest memories I've had. I was playing, computer games, and ultimately I think I followed probably the same path that a lot of, fairly intelligent, white, nerdy, unathletic males follow, which is that you grow up on games. I remember I was always, either at the pizza parlor playing Galga, or, I played, I had an N64. I went to my grandmother's house and I would play, I forget if it was like Battlezone or something. It's that it's a 3D tank game, but the only thing that's drawn are the outlines in green. It was some tank game. I remember losing hours to like Asteroids, that little basic fucking game where your ship is just a little fucking arrow on the screen. But basically from a very early age, I was always playing games. I got my N64 console and the GameCube, and then I moved on into, bigger, better consoles, and ultimately to the PC gamer I am today. So, it follows then that I would, as a young person, be interested in computing because, as many people my age did at the time, I wanted to design games. I wanted to, make games. And as I grew up, the desire to design games sort of generalized because video games became a little bit less of a part of my life. I don't play as many video games as I did when I was a kid. I'm not as rabid and as, gung-ho about them. And so as I've gotten older, the desire to develop games became a desire to, just learn to code and develop some kind of software and do some kind of thing. And, I suppose that was also bolstered by the fact that, I learned, what other stuff you could do. And, as phones developed, you can see, different apps and everything. And, there's all sorts of different applications. There's millions of different applications for even the most basic, computer coding knowledge. And, well, not even the most basic, but there's a lot of applications for fairly basic computer programming knowledge. So my desire to program something always remained, and it took me to the point where I was in, I think, my junior or senior year of high school, and I was finally able to take a basic programming class. Now, this was not a real good programming class. It was literally the most basic shit because it was Visual Basic, which is fucking basically, programming easy mode. You can do, what we would do is, this is what the public school system was like in Rhode Island here where I live. It was a math teacher who taught it. She probably had as much knowledge about Visual Basic as a person who had opened up Visual Basic 101, the textbook, and read about 3/4 of the way through, just enough to, get through, get the ideas and everything. I mean, she wasn't stupid by any measure, but it was not something that she had been, trained for or really specialized in. But basically she understood the basics of Visual Basic, and was, competent enough to teach that to kids. So what we did was we basically would do one exercise per 55-minute class period. It would take even the slowest people about 15 minutes. And then what I would do was I would fucking bring Halo Combat Evolved on a USB stick to the class, and I would load it on everybody's computer, and we would just basically play Halo, Combat Evolved on PC on a LAN, because it was all hooked into the same network for the rest of the 40 minutes in the class period. So video games and programming always went hand in hand for me, up until I got to college, because first year of college I took a basic course in just computer science and computer theory, and we did a little bit of programming in Java towards the end of the semester, or towards the end of the year, in the second semester rather. I forget the exact timeline, but computer programming is, to talk about my relationship to it, is a lot more imaginative and requires a lot more creativity than a layperson's understanding of it would perhaps suggest. It is a lot more creative, because what you do is you have, on one hand, these very basic building blocks that just tell you, oh, here's what you can create, here's what you can do, these are the parameters that all these functions have, this is what kind of input each of these variables requires or can hold. But then on the other side, you have a very, you have to problem solve for yourself. And it's not to say that my education, my public school education, was completely devoid of creative things. Like, there was a lot of creative writing and there was some critical thinking, but it's a lot more open-ended in programming than most people, I think, understand when you get to how to problem solve and how to create your own programs and how to basically solve a problem with those basic building blocks that don't really give you any hints as to how to solve a problem. And when you get out there on your own and you're trying to create your own app from nothing, it requires a lot of creativity and basically sort of an artistic talent almost to pull an entire program from the most basic rudimentary building blocks. So that's where I hit my personal wall with computer science, is when it got very abstract and got very what they call object oriented, and you had to create your own solutions without either a structure given to you by the building blocks themselves or even by a professor. I remember one of the last things I had to do before I dropped out of college. I left college twice because my college allows you to take up to, or allowed you, not my college anymore, of course, but it allowed you to take up to 2 semesters off for no reason. They would freeze your scholarship, freeze your grades, so nothing would happen to them. You could just come back when you were ready if you didn't have to give them any justification. I did that twice, once halfway through my second year, then I came back for what would be my third year, basically, or everybody else's third year, my 2.5 year or whatever, it doesn't really matter. But then I dropped out, at the end of the day, and I've yet to find the paper they give you when you drop out of college, because I wanted to frame that, but I think it's lost to history now. But to get back to the main story, honestly, I think one of the last things I had to do before I left college for the first time was I had to create a solitaire game out of, in Java, basically, which is the language we learned. And I had to create a solitaire game, and it was just so hard for me because even though I understood basically what you have to do, you have to, instantiate like the deck of cards as an array. And even though like any game, you have like a win state, you have, certain mechanics, you have a limited number of cards or pieces on the table or whatever. It was very hard for me to, without a lot of direction from somebody higher up, just take those building blocks and make an actual solution to a problem out of this. And that is, I think, my biggest downfall, not only with the idea of computer science, but with my relationship to education as a whole. To give you a little bit of history, and this is not something I really talk about a lot, I was always very good. I was always an A student, like borderline teacher's pet. I never really got bullied. I got along with everybody basically in school. From first or kindergarten to 11th grade, I learned that system. I learned like basically what a test was like, what a quiz was like, what an essay wants from you, and I was very easily able to game that system. I was able to, to this day it baffles me that, people had to study for a ninth grade test. Like I was always able to like procrastinate for everything. If I studied at all, I would just open up the textbook and read over it and gloss over it and walk in the next morning and just bang it out from basically memory and memorize the formulas or what have you. And it wasn't completely devoid, like I said, of critical thinking or creative aspects, but most of it was a lot of rote regurgitation, and I was always very good at that. And then when I came to 11th grade, I had a little bit of a breakdown because I tried to procrastinate all my summer reading and summer work for all my AP classes I was going to take that year into like the night or two before, like I'd always done before, and I had no problem with it. But suddenly I found myself, not being able to do it, and that ultimately led to me having like a nervous breakdown and skipping the first half of 11th grade, switching schools, and then completing high school at a different school, devoid of that sort of, the pride I used to take in that academic feedback loop, because I always liked the feedback loop that academia gave you, because I didn't get any positive reinforcement at home because my parents were pieces of shit who had no business raising a child and were always like at each other's throats even when they had divorced. But school by contrast was a place I could go that made sense. You get the test, you do well, you memorize what you have to memorize, you spit it back out at them, and they, lavish praise on you. And that was always all good up until the SATs even. I got a fucking, like a statewide commendation for my SAT scores, which were by no means perfect, which made no goddamn sense at all. But, it was always very easy to, game that system. And even when I lost my personal attachment to that feedback loop after I had that meltdown between 10th and 11th grade, I still found, even through the second half of 11th grade and 12th grade and the first year of college, basically everything was really easy. Everything was pretty basic, and you just had to give them what they wanted. It was all like college to me was basically high school 2.0 as far as I knew it, up until I got into that programming class. And, for the first part of that programming class, or when I was learning Java, when I learned HTML and everything really seemed pretty goddamn basic. It seemed like it was going to be more of the same. But when everything got more abstract and I had to create my own solutions and figure out my own ways of tackling with problems that wouldn't necessarily even be remotely close to what other people were doing, that's where I hit the wall. Because the tragedy of me, basically, is that I never really had any kind of imagination or creativity. Certainly, if I had that, I don't have enough to problem solve and take something as basic as the building blocks and the basic functions and methods and variables and all those basic rudimentary rigid tools and turn them into something truly adaptive and modular and open-ended and object-oriented and abstract. And that's where I hit the wall, because it was sad. And this is why I caution people against going to college, or going to college undeclared, or going to college even if you have an idea of what you want to do, but you're maybe not absolutely certain. Because, one day you can just show up at college and you can get an assignment and you hit a fucking wall and you struggle and you struggle. And the truth is, and the tragedy is, that you never have struggled like that before. And you're fucking 19 or 20 years old and your brain has already lost a lot of its plasticity, and you don't know how to get past that struggle because you've literally never had to try before. Because every assignment you've ever had, you could do with your fucking hands tied behind your back, and everything you've had to do, you could just procrastinate until the night before, and you just hit that wall, and you have no problem solving skills, you have no creative problem solving skills up to the task, and you're suddenly being bested and outperformed by people who you would have once considered less intelligent, because those people who on the surface seem less intelligent and all your teachers would basically acknowledge were less intelligent than you all through high school up until that point, even in the first year of college, they had to struggle. They had to develop their struggle overcoming skills, their coping skills, their problem solving skills is the word I'm looking for. They had 19 years to develop their problem solving skills because they were average. And now suddenly you, the fucking prodigal genius, are hitting a wall and you are devoid of problem solving skills and you're too old to make them. And that's kind of sad to me because you know, computer science was this thing that had always interested me. I love the idea of like machine learning and emergent behavior and artificial intelligence, but I'll never touch it. I'll never research it. I'll never be a part of creating it because that whole line of programming to me is cut off at a very, very low point. It's not like I hit like high-tech AI design and then I stopped and I couldn't do it anymore. I hit basic things that other people were really good at, and I just couldn't do it because of a lack of problem solving skills and creativity and imagination. And so that's kind of my relationship with computer science. It was always this thing that I thought would be this lifelong path, this lifelong logical path from child playing video games to, you know, wanting to design software to going to school to design software. It seemed like the only path because I'm not athletic. I have no strength. What other shit am I going to do? At the time, like I wondered what kind of job would I get if I didn't go to college? So it seemed like the only path for me. And then I sort of, you know, hit a wall. And for all my supposed intelligence and genius and all the praise that people lavished on me for, you know, from grade 1 to grade fucking 12, just for being able to, you know, figure out what a test demands of you and what an essay demands of you and all that shit, it was, in the end, worth nothing. And computer science is something I find really beautiful because, you know, I really admire people who could take those building blocks and turn it into something creative and build basically something from next to nothing. But computer science for me will always be the vehicle by which I found out my own limitations and the vehicle which, you know, for good dispelled from me my it ruined education for me. Not because of what could happen with anything, computer science or not, but it put the final nail in the coffin of my relationship with education that had already started to decay and, you know, give way to more social concerns after that breakdown in 11th grade. So yeah, it's I think I've said all I've needed to say. I hope I hit the record button this time. But yeah, I'm obviously Jesus. That's sort of my tumultuous and sad relationship with computer science. Hope you enjoyed the video. Next week, we will hopefully get around to finally talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I will talk to you then. Thanks for watching. And just on a whim for the end of this video, I went back and looked at a project I helped a friend of mine with. She was in a meteorology course and had to do a computer science requirement for some reason, and I helped her program a battleship game in C++ because it's pretty easy to translate your knowledge from Java to C++. And honestly, it looks like a fucking different language. Like somebody else wrote it in like half English, and I'm struggling to understand what I, you know, once understood evidently pretty well enough to get her a 98 on the project. But yeah, so it's kind of sad how much time has passed. This is from 2013, but it just goes to show you how quickly something you've thought was really important to you can become alien to you, and I think that's a little bit sad. But if I had one piece of life advice for anybody, I would just say don't stress being an average or subpar student, because in the end, you might just wind up being better at it than the supposed fucking geniuses.